So, how is it possible that a country roughly the size of Nevada can pack an entire world inside its borders? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today as we dive into Ecuador, a nation of just unbelievable contrasts and diversity. I mean, just think about it. In one part of the country, you've got towering snow-capped volcanoes and glaciers that literally scrape the sky. This is the Sierra, Ecuador's mountainous spine. But then you travel just a little bit east and bam, you are dropped right into the thick, humid, buzzing world of the Amazon rainforest. Totally different. Okay, now let's zip over to the west. Here, you'll find hundreds of miles of Pacific coastline. Everything from bustling little fishing villages to these dense, mysterious mangrove forests. And we're not done yet. Head 600 miles offshore, and you find a literal living laboratory of evolution, the volcanic islands of the Galapagos. So you gotta ask, right? How does all of this fit together? What are the forces, geographical, cultural, historical, that have managed to shape this one absolutely incredible nation? All right, let's start with the land itself. Ecuador is famously and neatly divided into four totally distinct natural regions. And this table just lays it out perfectly. You have La Costa, the hot, sticky coastal plains. Then there's La Sierra, the cool, crisp Andean highlands. Jump over to El Oriente, the super humid Amazon jungle. And finally, the insular region, the Galapagos, which, has a climate all its own. And what's so wild is that it's not just about the scenery. Each of these zones has its own weather, its own plants, and really, its own distinct way of life. Of course, a country is so much more than its landscape. It's about the people who call it home. And you guessed it, Ecuador's cultural fabric is just as diverse as its geography. Now, while most Ecuadorians identify as mestizo, which means they have a mix of indigenous and European heritage, that's really just the beginning of the story. The country is also home to more than a dozen distinct indigenous groups, like the Quechua in the Andes and the Shuar in the Amazon. And on top of that, you have these vibrant Afro-Ecuadorian communities, especially right along the coast. Maybe the best way to understand this blend is through a soup bowl. Seriously. There's a national dish called fanesca, which is this thick, amazing soup they serve around Easter. And get this, it combines ingredients from every single region, fish from the coast, grains from the highlands. It's a perfect metaphor for how Ecuador takes all its different parts and creates one single national identity. And that identity is really built on a few key pillars. Family's absolutely everything here. Local festivals aren't just little get-togethers. They are massive, colorful events that pull whole communities together. And then there's the one thing that unites pretty much everyone, from the highest mountains to the lowest coasts, a diehard passion for football. Now, this union of people and place, well, it wasn't always a peaceful process. Modern Ecuador was really forged in the fire of conquest, the fight for independence, and some pretty intense internal rivalries. So, let's take a quick walk through history. Before the Spanish ever showed up, a big chunk of Ecuador was actually part of the mighty Inca Empire. Then, after winning independence in 1822, it had a brief stint as part of Simón Bolívar's Grand Colombia before deciding, nah, we're going to be our own republic in 1830. And then there's this really recent huge shift, the adoption of the US dollar back in 2000, which was driven by a massive crisis. But running through all of that history is this one epic rivalry that has defined the nation's politics. It's the rivalry between two cities. You've got Quito, the capital, up in the highlands, which has always been more conservative, more aristocratic. And then you have Guayaquil, the big coastal port city, which has always been the heart of liberal, business-focused interests. This tension, this constant push and pull between the Sierra and the Costa, has shaped the country for almost 200 years. All right, let's journey offshore because we have to talk about Ecuador's crown jewel, the Galapagos Islands. This is a place so unique, it literally changed the way we understand life on Earth. Get this number in your head, 22. That's how many species of land birds in the Galapagos are endemic. So what does that even mean? It means they exist right here and absolutely nowhere else on the planet, period. The islands are so isolated that they created this kind of evolutionary bubble, which, as we all know, is what famously caught the eye of a young Charles Darwin. And the results of that evolutionary bubble are just mind-blowing. We're talking about giant tortoises, the only iguana on Earth that swims and feeds in the ocean, a cormorant that completely lost its ability to fly, and penguins, living right on the equator. It's a real-life showcase of how life adapts. So that's the nature, the people, the history. But what about Ecuador today? How does it balance all this incredible natural wealth with the pressures of a modern, globalized economy? When you look at the modern economy, it pretty much all comes down to its natural resources. As you can see, the top exports are oil from the Amazon, shrimp farmed on the coast, and of course, bananas. This reliance on raw commodities, it's defined the country's whole economic story. And here's the catch. When your economy is built on stuff like that, your country's fortunes are completely tied to the whims of global markets. When oil prices are high, Ecuador is booming. When they crash, the country faces a crisis. It has created this never-ending economic roller coaster of boom and bust. Well, that roller coaster really went off the rails in the late 1990s. The country's own currency, the sucre, was basically collapsing from hyperinflation. So the government made a really drastic decision. They just ditched the sucre entirely and officially adopted the US dollar to try and stabilize everything. So today, Ecuador is really walking a tightrope. Its amazing ecosystems are incredibly vulnerable to climate change. Political instability is still a constant challenge, and there's this ongoing battle. How do you protect your incredible natural resources from the very real pressures of development? And that leaves us with a huge, critical question. For a nation that holds a whole world of natural and cultural treasures, what's the right balance between progress and preservation? The answer to that question is going to define everything about Ecuador's future.